Hello, my dear students. Welcome back to the first module of your paper, of your course, Introducing Language and Literature. Today, in this presentation, we'll be looking at Old English period. Old English period, you can see the slides, I hope. Old English period began, or it is between 500 to 1100 AD. Now, as I have already mentioned to you in our classes, we categorize periods of English language based on certain historical events. Now, the Old English period begins at around 500 AD because that was the time when the Anglo-Saxon people, Anglo-Saxon tribes, came to England after the Roman conquest and started settling in England. And they settled and they began to exert influence from around 500 AD. And that age, that marks the beginning of the Old English period. And it ends by around 1100 AD. Again, the event that marked the end of Old English and the beginning of Middle English was in 1066. You learn about it when you learn Middle English period. So 1066 was another crucial year in the history of English language, in the history of England. And why it was important, we'll discuss in the later sections. But for the time being, let's remember that Old English period was between 500 AD and 1100 AD. Now let's look at the history of Old English period. It begins with the Anglo-Saxon conquest of England. Now before I move on to that, I think I should tell you about the earlier inhabitants of Britain. Now if you look at the map of Europe, which I have placed here, if you look at this, you can see this part. This is called England, this pink colored patch. This is England and this green patch is Ireland. Okay. Now this area, it is separated from the mainland of Europe by the English Channel. English Channel is a very small, about 33 kilometers wide channel, and England stays separate from the European continent because of the English Channel. Okay, so this island or this part of Europe called England or the United Kingdom was occupied from the Iron Ages, uh, by a group of Celtic tribes. Celtic tribes. They were the initial people. Celtic tribes were actually tribal people from central part of Europe. Somehow they crossed the English Channel and settled in England. So they were the first set of people to live in England. That was sometime around 700 BC. Okay, that is the time when the Celtic people lived in England. Now, what happened by around 40 AD? The Romans, at that time it was the Roman Empire, the great rule of Caesar, the various Caesars of Rome. So there was a Roman invasion of England. England was occupied by Romans in the first century BC. That is sometime around 40 BC, and they continued to rule England for about 400 years. The Romans ruled England, the so-called England at that time, that area for about 400 years. Okay, it was in the year 410 AD that the Romans withdrew from England and went back. So when the Romans went back, basically they were the Celts and people who were influenced by the Romans. Okay, so that is how England was before 500 AD. Now, after the Romans left, that is after about 410 AD, and maybe after about 30 years after that, sometime around 450 AD, the three tribes from the Scandinavian region, this region. Okay, three tribes: the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. Those are the three types: the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. They invaded England. Okay? The Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes invaded England. So that period, which begins with the Anglo-Saxon conquest of England, is called the Old English period. The period which begins with Anglo-Saxon conquest of England is called Old English period. Now, who were these Anglo-Saxons? Now, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, they were tribal people from the northwest. They are from the northwest of Germany. Sorry, they are not from the Scandinavian region. They are from the northwest of Germany. Northwest of Germany means this part of Germany. Angles. The Saxons were from the northwest of Germany. The Angles and the Angles was the Danish mainland. Was the people of the Danish mainland, that is Denmark. Yeah, that's this part. So Angles came from this part of Europe. Saxons came from West Germany, that is this part of Germany. And the Jutes came from the Rhineland, which is the southern part of Germany. Okay, so people who were living here, Germany and Denmark, North Germany, and Northwest Germany and Southwest Germany, and Denmark, they moved to England. And they occupied England. And that marks the beginning of Old English period. Okay? Right. Now, these people, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, they were very closely related. They are somehow like neighbors, or somewhere like neighbors. So they moved to England as one people, and they called themselves the English people. So basically, the English people that we see today are actually people who are descendants from this Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. And the earlier inhabitants, I told you before the Romans came, there were a set of people, the Celtic tribes. They were called Britons. So Great Britain has its present name from the Celtic tribes, but the name English comes from Angles, Angles and Saxons and Jutes, and that began in the year, the Old English period began in the year 500 AD. So that is the basic history. And once these Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, when they came to England, they occupied England, and they divided England into 7 kingdoms. 7 kingdoms, and in history, there it is called, in British history or in English history, it is called the Heptarchy. Hepta means 7. Heptarchy, the 7 kingdoms, and they established 7 kingdoms there. And these are the 7 kingdoms, and this is the region. Okay. The northern part of England. Now you can see the green patch here, the green patch in the map of England. This is the map of England. So the green patch here, it is actually the area that is occupied by Celts, Britons. Okay, the first tribal people there in England were the Celts, and the green patches here, there it was occupied by Celts. Even when Anglo-Saxons and Jutes came there, they could not get into the Celtic areas, the Celt regions, the Britons regions. The remaining part they occupied. The remaining part they occupied, they divided into 7 kingdoms. And the 7 kingdoms are, the northern part is Northumbria, and the middle part is Mercia, and the eastern part, this is the eastern side, the eastern part, it was called East Anglia. Okay, so basically these 3 regions were the regions occupied by Angles: Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia. And there was the region called Essex. Essex is actually eastern region occupied by the Saxons. Eastern region occupied by the Saxons was Essex. Essex, Sussex, the southern part, and Wessex, the western part. Essex, Sussex, and Wessex, and Kent, the eastern side, the southeastern side of England. This is Kent. Okay, so that makes it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 kingdoms, and the tiny little area here occupied by the Jutes. So basically, the whole of England was mostly occupied by Angles and Saxons, and a small region by Jutes. These were the 7 kingdoms of the Old English period, the 7 major kingdoms of the Old English period, and it is known as the Heptarchy. Okay, fine. Now let's move slowly to the Old English dialects. Now it was a large region, the English language, even though it was a single language, it had various regional dialects. There were four main dialects in the Old English period. Four main variations of English, four main dialects of Old English, and those four dialects are based on their geographic locations. Let's look at that. Again, let's look at this this map, and in this you can see that there are, and this is a map showing the major dialects of Old English period. Okay? Major dialects of Old English period, and the four major dialects are Northumbrian, spoken in Northumbrian, Mercian, spoken in the Mercian kingdom. Okay, and another one, the third one is West Saxon. West Saxon was spoken in the Wessex region and the Jute occupied region of England. So Wessex was the third dialect, and the last one was the Kentish, spoken in the Kentish region or the Kentish kingdom. So the four dialects of Old English period are West Saxon, Kentish, Mercian, and Northumbrian. And of these four dialects, West Saxon was the dominant one because West Saxon kings were very powerful. So these kings, they dominated over the other regions, and therefore the language of the powerful kingdom became the major dialect. Okay, and many literary works were produced in the West Saxon region, in the West Saxon dialect, and so that language, West Saxon dialect, came or evolved as the standard literary dialect. The literary standard dialect was the West Saxon dialect because it was the West Saxon kings who unified England. Okay. Now, what happened because of this? Because of different dialects existing in Old English, we can see doublets. Doublets means words having similar meanings, or words having different meanings even though they sound same. So many variations of same words could be found. From one dialect, another from another dialect. Both were taken into the into the English language. So there was doubling, sort of doubling happening in the language because of various dialects that existed there. Okay, so that's about history and the Old English dialect. Now